not to apply the stronger of two designations given on the foreign terrorist organization designation, which criminalizes providing material support or resources, which is so desperately needed to control the Iran puppets.
Chairman Wilson, thanks for the opportunity to respond. I think first and foremost, it's clear that the Biden administration from the beginning of this conflict has done the bare minimum. I think they realize that there's a political outcry because global shipping has been put at risk. So to continue to do nothing was not acceptable. So instead, the decision clearly has been made to do in terms of putting new sanctions, the bare minimum. So redesignating the Houthis as a specially designated group under a Treasury Department designation rather than the stronger foreign terrorist organization designation. So in order to say we've done something, but I would compare that, sir, to the responses that we're seeing militarily, that in defensive in nature only. So in order to be able to say they're doing something, but the reality is our partners and allies, and unfortunately the IRGC and their Houthi proxies see very clearly that we're not taking real action. And so the attacks are continuing, and they will continue until a more forceful response is initiated.
And Director Pollack, indeed, the lack of response to me is very troubling because we've had attacks by the puppets of Iran that affect 40 different countries. This is not just America, not just the United Kingdom, and the effect of delivering grain to countries, causing potential starvation around the world. This is a defensive action on our part. What more can we do to degrade the Iranian capabilities in the Red Sea?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think that we need to recognize that Iran is trying to wage war against the United States and its allies all across the region. The Red Sea is one theater, and the Houthis are one actor in that. And I think that what we need to recognize is that we need to push back on the Iranians everywhere. The best way that we can push back on the Iranians everywhere is by helping our allies everywhere. And unfortunately, for the last at least 15 years, and let's recognize it has been under the last two administrations, including this one, that our allies have felt time and again that the United States has not been there to support them, that they've been forced to take on the Iranians on their own. And as a result, we've seen our allies make compromises with the Iranians. Most recently, and I think most flagrantly, the agreement between the Saudis and the Iranians brokered by the Chinese. Again, too much has been made of that, but nonetheless, it is a clear sign that these are all countries, allies of ours, that simply do not believe that the United States is supporting them, and that therefore they have to make compromises which they did not want to make.
Director, thank you. Thank each of you. And now I proceed to Congressman Jerry Connolly.
I'm going to defer to Mr. Sherman.
Thank you. If there ever was a foreign terrorist organization, it is the Houthi. We have not designated them. We have not designated them because that could possibly interfere with feeding the people they rule. This would come as a shock to General Douglas MacArthur if, in the day after Pearl Harbor, he had been informed that his number one objective was to feed the civilians of Japan. Those who cheer the Houthi, who shout their praises, claim to be progressives. They should take responsibility for the death that the Houthi have caused, not just in Yemen, but elsewhere. You see, 20% of Ukraine's grain exports go through the Red Sea, similar amounts from other countries. When that grain price goes up, people in East Africa, in Ethiopia, and Tigray, and poor parts of South Asia don't eat as much. They can't afford it, and they die. Not wasting disease that you can capture on a video, but rather they're eating 2 meals instead of 3, and that increases their susceptibility to death. I would like, without objection, to put in the record an article from The Advocate, perhaps the leading LGBTQ plus publication in America, which is headlined, Houthi Court Sentences 13 Men to Public Execution for Gay Sex. Now, that's just one court in one province at one time. How many members of the LGBTQ plus are brutally killed by the Houthi year in and year out? So there is blood on the hands of the Houthi. There is blood on the hands of those who prevent us from taking effective action against them and shout their praises. And I see that blood is actually on the hands of people visible to me right now. Okay. I would ask for some additional time. I think, Dr. Pollack, you had it exactly right. We cannot limit ourselves to just trying to prevent the Houthi, reduce the amount by which the Houthi intercept shipping. We have to provide weapons to the legitimate government of Yemen and its allies. Dr. Pollack, Iran benefits from freedom of navigation around the world. Is it morally right that not a single Iranian ship has been stopped by the U.S. Navy, even for a day, when Iran interferes with the commerce of the entire world?
The morality of it, I simply am not qualified to comment on. Strategically, what I will say is that the United States has chosen not to do so repeatedly for a wide variety of reasons. But I think that it is important. I think that the question that you're asking, Congressman, is a very important one, and it should be on the table. As my dear friend Dr. Alterman has pointed out, the Iranians don't fight by the rules. They don't play by the rules. And we have handcuffed ourselves time and again in trying to respond effectively by doing so when they choose not to. We are confronted all across the region by a very determined, wily, and unscrupulous adversary. We owe it to put all the options on the table and consider them.
So if a ship taking luxury goods to Iran was delayed for a day or two, would Tehran get the message?
They might very well. We have seen that in the past, the Iranians are incredibly cautious and respectful of American military power. When they believe that there is no threat that we will employ it, they do whatever they can. When they believe that there is a chance we will employ it, they suddenly become much more cautious and respectful.
I'd finally point out that to have a durable ceasefire in Gaza, we need to see Hamas leave Gaza, just as we saw in 1982 when terrorists left Lebanon. And a durable ceasefire cannot exist if Hamas is there, because they've already declared they want to repeat October 7th again and again until the blood of Israelis flows again and again. That is the goal of Hamas, and that is the goal of those who support Hamas. I would ask...
I'd like to remind the audience that disruption of committee proceedings is against the law. Holding up signs or making verbal ignorant outbursts during the proceedings is disruptive. The ignorant outbursts particularly. Any disruptions will result in a suspension of proceedings until the Capitol Police can restore order. And indeed, there should be understanding. There are people here who want peace through strength. With that, I now recognize the Congressman from Georgia, Congressman Dr. Veteran Rich McCormick.
I believe there's more people to remove, Mr. Chair, but I'll start for now. I appreciate the witnesses' willingness to be here and to point out some very important things to us, both strategically and morally. that I think will affect the future of the United States and global peace, which is ultimately what every warrior wants. Anybody who's ever put their life on the line to go overseas for their nation does not want war. I don't want my sons to go serve overseas and die. I want them to live. I want them to live in peace. With that, I think it's very important to recognize what we've done and what the consequences are. In February of 2021, the Biden administration removed the Houthis, which were on the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation and their specially designated global terrorist group designation when the Trump administration had put it in place. At the time, Secretary Blinken cited humanitarian concerns as the reasons for these decisions, saying that the humanitarian aid could not reach the Yemeni people if these designations remain in place. I want to make a few points. I went on the first freshman Codell to Bangladesh, the largest refugee camp in the world. 1 million people that have been displaced through violence, who are living off of now $8 per person per month. There's people all over, we have a record number of refugees all over the world right now, starving, displaced, being raped, being killed constantly. And yet we're more worried about idealism than realism when it comes to who we aid and who we abet. And this is the problem. When we talk about worrying about designations so that we can help a people that the money's not even getting to, that the help's not even getting to, when you have an evil regime is keeping the food from getting to the people who need it most. And instead, we've created an environment where the Iranians when we're talking about realism and who we're trying to assist and who we're trying to claim as our friends.
You should not be assisting a genocide. Ceasefire now. Free Palestine. American taxpayers don't want this to happen.
I think it goes without saying that I'll reclaim my time. Okay, very good. Thank you. Ms. Leedon, do you believe that the Biden administration's reasoning for removing the Houthis from the FTO designation was accurate and the correct step in addressing the humanitarian crisis in Yemen?
No, I do not.
Do you think that the aid that has been forthcoming goes to the right people?
No, I do not.
Exactly my point. I think we need to be more concerned in supporting the resistance in Iran, for example. Those people who would stand up against the injustices against women and children, against education, against rights.
Absolute disgrace. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. Ceasefire now. No more money to Israel. This isn't complicated. You absolute disgrace for human beings.
And there we go with the absolute misunderstanding of realism versus idealism. Iran is an evil regime. It's a theocracy that oppresses its people. It has kept women from their natural God-given rights. And yet we're more concerned with not getting food to the people that when we give aid to these corrupt agencies than we are with a resistance to a regime that's actually supporting all of our enemies all around the world and actually trying to kill Americans to the hundreds and thousands of efforts with armed aggression towards our troops overseas. We've lost Navy SEALs. We've lost Army National Guard. We've lost American lives. And we've put them in jeopardy every single day for the last, not just several months, but several years because of our policy. Dr. Pollack, how would you explain the Biden administration's seemingly timid defensive response to the Houthi aggression? Is it fair to speculate that it's due in part to the administration's desire to revive the Iran nuclear deal?
Congressman, first, I would encourage you to have the administration come and defend its own policies. But since you've asked me to speculate, I can certainly do so. I do suspect that that is part of what is going on. I think that they are hoping that at some point they can get back to it. And I think that just broadly speaking, their approach has been to assume that negotiations are most likely when you start by making concessions to the other side. I understand the logic behind that, but historically, I don't think that it is ever proven to be accurate. People come to the table when they have a reason to do so. If you remove that reason for coming to the table, they either don't come or they show up not believing that they have to actually make concessions.
Well put, sir. It's been my experience in my over 20 years of Marine Corps and Navy experience around the world, whether it be in Africa, the Middle East, or the Far East, or anywhere else we're in combatant zones, that evil people only understand one thing, and that's strength. And that's what creates peace, not weakness, not concessions. And I think whether it be President Carter, President Obama, or President Biden, what I've seen is every time we give concessions, bad things are the result. And therefore, I would encourage my allies on both sides of the aisle, and I think we've made really good points from both sides of the aisles, to recognize evil and to deal with it accordingly. And with that, I yield.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCormick. And we now proceed to Congressman Jerry Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Altman, welcome back. Good to see you again. Ms. Ledeen and others have characterized the Biden administration response to the Houthi threat as timid. Do you share that view?
I would describe it as cautious rather than timid, but I would argue the Trump administration was rather timid about the Houthis as well. After all,
The one Ms. Ledeen worked for?
I'm not a historian, sir.
Yeah.
Actually, I am
I
a
just
historian.
think
I'm sorry, I am a
the
historian.
pot calling the kettle black just needs to be
Exactly.
called out. That's all. Go ahead.
The gentleman from Virginia and I worked together when he was a young man. I was a very young man. So we go back a little while. The Trump administration did not designate the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization until the last 2 days of the Trump administration. There are excruciatingly difficult problems involved with characterizing the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, in particular, well-meaning people attempting to save lives.
I know. I got to interrupt you. I only have 5 minutes.
Okay.
So you got it. So part of this timid characterization apparently seems to be we're not willing to be to go in more forcefully militarily to address the Houthi threat in the Red Sea and elsewhere. Remind us, was there not a pretty forceful military intervention by the Saudis in Yemen against the Houthis for some period of time?
There has been an almost 9-year effort by the Saudis. The Saudis are now trying to negotiate their way out of a
Dr.
war with the
Altman,
Houthis.
please answer the question. I didn't ask that part. I'm getting there.
Sorry, sir.
So how did that work out for the Saudis? 9 years of kinetic involvement that apparently others want the United States to emulate.
In fact, it was only 2 years into the Saudi engagement in Yemen that the Iranians got deeply involved with providing precisely the weapons that the chairman referred to. That didn't start at the beginning.
But
that
Dr.
started
Pollack,
2 years
Dr.
into the
Pollack
Saudi
made
war.
the point, a good one, I thought, that the Houthis, what they care about is territory. Did the Houthis expand or contract territory during this 9-year interval of Saudi aggression?
My recollection is it was mostly a stalemate. There was an initial period where they lost some territory, and I think it's been
So if one of the goals of the Saudis was to restrict the Houthis and to regain territory, it apparently didn't work. Is that correct?
Sure.
Right, didn't work. So it isn't timidity for the Saudis now to look at other options, one of which is engagement. Is that fair?
Yes.
And would it be fair to say, and the United States is encouraging that because of the lack of results of the alternative that was indeed tried over a 9-year period?
As well as the concern that there could be an open-ended regional conflict with no obvious endpoint.
Again, you're going far.
Sorry, sir.
Your brilliance precedes you, but you're answering a question not yet asked. But okay, that was my next one. What are the risks of the United States, with the best of intentions, deciding to expand its military response to the Houthi attacks? What are the risks of that? What could go wrong?
Well, one risk is that the Houthis keep doing it and we look ineffectual. One risk is that we end up in an open-ended conflict defending soft targets all over the world that is hard to defend. The problem is we have to be successful 100% of the time. And if we're successful 99% of the time, our adversaries point to the 1% and our people point to the 1%, and we look like we are failing instead of succeeding.
Is there a reason to believe that the engagement that the administration and the Saudis are involved in with the Houthis has promise of any kind of success?
I think as promise of some success, I agree very much with Ken that you have to come into negotiations strong. But I also think that you have to be willing to let bad people get something, not because you like them, but because they're a reality.
And that's something for the Houthis is ultimately a participation in governance of Yemen.
I think participation, not control, participation in governance.
Right. I thank you, and I thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Connolly, for abiding by the 5-minute rule. We now proceed to Congressman Jim Baird of Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our witnesses for being here today. You know, on Monday, the terrorist organization, the Houthis, we've been talking a lot about here. I'll call them terrorists because that's what they really are. But they launched an attack on an Iran-bound grain cargo ship. And as you know, Iran is a major Houthi ally, and this attack makes it clear that they are just widely targeting ships without a direct motive. And they claim that their strikes have been a response to the situation in Gaza. However, they've been targeting the ships that have absolutely no links to Israel. So are the Houthis using the war on Israel as an excuse to organize these inconsistent attacks? And can you explain the actual impact that these attacks have had on agricultural goods through the Bab el-Mandeb? So, Secretary Ledeen, would you want to start that discussion?
Yes, thank you. I think it's important to look at the Houthi decision-making in the framework of being effectively and actually a proxy of Iran. So they are part of this regional escalation that Iran has underway right now. And they're one, you know, the analogy has been made frequently that the Iranian regime's like an octopus, the head of the octopus, and there are many different tentacles, the Houthis being one. So as we consider the decision-making of the Houthis, I think it's important to note Iran plays a very large role in that decision-making, especially as they provide a lot of the weapons that the Houthis are using. So I would characterize it that way. In terms of the disruption of shipping, specifically of agricultural products, that is clearly one of their primary intents. They want to disrupt global shipping. They want to increase the prices. They want to hurt us. And in a way, we could think about it as effectively an Iranian sanction against us because they're raising the price of goods. And the longer this goes on, the higher these prices will become.
Thank you. Dr. Pollack, do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think that you're absolutely correct, Mr. Congressman, in that initially the Houthis did begin these attacks in hope of showing solidarity with the Palestinians because, as I mentioned, they were deeply unpopular in both the Arab and Muslim world beforehand, and this was a perfect opportunity for them to ingratiate themselves with both communities. But I think you're exactly right that the Houthis are getting a tremendous amount from these attacks. This is exactly what they wanted. And what we've seen, as the administration has pointed out, they are attacking ships that have no connection to Israel whatsoever. It is very useful for them. It is terrific for them to demonstrate their importance, their power in the world by shutting down or threatening to shut down one of the world's most important shipping routes.
Dr. Alderman, you...
And Congressman, the other important thing is the Houthis are really bad at governance. They're really bad at governance. They're very unpopular. But being at war means that they bring people together. There's solidarity that comes from being on a war footing. Yemen has been at war. A lot of people who like using weapons in Yemen, and the weapons are on display. There is a way in which being at war is much better for the Houthis because it means that people aren't criticizing them for being so bad at running Yemen.
Thank you. Oh, I'm about to run out of time, so I think I've got more questions, but I appreciate your answers, and I'm going to